Welcome back. We're with Jonathan McHugh and Nick Willard to tackle the topic of sync licensing. It's now time for You Asked, where we answer questions from our community. And the first question is, it's difficult to get a foot in the door, and this one is from Neil Sawyer. So should artists offer independent productions use of songs without licensing fees for the sake of exposure?
I'm not crazy about gratis uses. I like to pay artists something, and so I don't ever really ask for gratis unless it's fundamentally impossible not to pay any money. So I think in any scenario, the answer is always yes, but you try to get some money for your work, even if it's $1 sometimes, just to say you got paid for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that was, I guess, driven by the production music world, where with a lot of the broadcasters, there were low dollar or no dollar license fees. In those cases, those companies were really well set up to collect the publishing, and they could actually make a good assessment of what the publishing revenue was likely to be. So I think in those cases, there's much more of an argument for that type of model. I would personally feel deeply uncomfortable if that was something that was happening regularly. Again, going back to what Jonathan said, in certain cases, if there really isn't budget available for a certain project, then maybe, but it wouldn't be something that I'd be sort of trying to encourage as a kind of regular occurrence.
I'm sure artists would be very happy to hear that from the both of you. This next question comes from Brian Barn. He wants to know how to write a pitch letter without sounding pushy.
Good question. I think, as I said, the more educated and researched you can appear to be, that the supervisor's work, and you're a fan of something for a certain reason, and that doesn't sound too sycophantic, so to speak. But yet, you want to let people know that you can help them by providing music for them. Because again, what is it that's going to get our attention of the thousands of emails that people get a week, supervisors, that people pitching blindly? So it's like that line from Spinal Tap. There's a thin line between clever and stupid. So you need to be somewhere in that middle ground.
Yeah. So not that line where he says it's all about the doubly.
Correct. Not that one.
Thank you. All right, I just wanted to get that.
It's good that you got it, though. You got a line there from that movie.
It's amazing. Here's one I prepared earlier. All right, Nick, how to write a pitch letter without sounding pushy.
Just going to reference your great lock stock impression there, Vic. There's a good bit of accent going on. Listen, can't really add much more to what Jonathan's already said, other than it all comes down to tone, to being humble, the thin line of trying to put some personality, stroke humor into what you communicate without it coming across as being, too, I guess, unprofessional in that regard. But ultimately, I think anyone respects someone who's being mildly pushy for the sake of their career, as long as they don't step over the line of being disrespectful or too pushy or not taking no for an answer.
Okay, and how long after we send the first email or communication should they follow up?
I'd say like 2 weeks. If you don't hear anything back, see if you can get one more response. A lot of times I miss emails, and a lot of times I just can't respond to blind stuff and listen to blind stuff. It's just too much. So it's really just a catch as catch can. Personal references are always important when someone knows somebody else. That's really important. Personal introductions from other people make you want to have to read it and respond. So if you can ever find that connection to somebody else, that's super important. And that's where the third party sync agencies come in handy, or an organization like Songtradr who has relationships.
Good point. Nick, 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any kind of sales cycle. 2 weeks kind of feels pretty decent. I'd also say it's like there is a bit of a numbers game to it, both in terms of the kind of mass audience of, the more people that you reach out to, the more likely you are to get some kind of response. But equally, if someone's not got back to you in that kind of first couple of attempts, I think it's perfectly reasonable to go back to them thereafter, whether that's 3 months later or 6 months later. Like, sometimes you make your own luck in terms of timing. And it could just be that there's a particular project or a particular need at that time that suddenly makes that communication way more relevant than it might have been a year ago.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
a good point. Relevance is super important.
Yeah. All right. So this one comes from Mateus Lacerda. He wants to know, does the artist's design have a significant influence, or is what really matters the way the music sounds?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all music, how it sounds. But the first thing you do see when you're on YouTube or you're on Spotify, you stumble across something or you're looking for some things, is visual. So the visuals do matter greatly. The aesthetic of your art matters greatly, but nothing substitutes for what it sounds like.
So from Jerome Davis, he wants to know, I think music structure / format is a huge hurdle for most. Can you discuss that in Happy Hour?
Well, I mean, there's a traditional song, three verses and chorus and pre-chorus. I mean, that's the structure of a song, but not everything has to be that way. And a lot of times we can't even use a whole song or even a part of the song. So it's really about the catchiness of it. And, supervisors listen to so much music. Whatever your first 10 to 15 seconds is, it's got to grab people. And that's really, that's a classic case of first appearances do matter, right? Your first 15 seconds, if it's meandering, it doesn't, you can't quite know where it is. Like if you could hit people off the bat and go, my song is this in 15 seconds of vibe-wise, that's going to help me stay in there and keep listening and go, maybe if I took this piece and put it here, like you have to start conceptualizing the music for where you need to put it. So I think that's a key thing. Not necessarily structure, but intro in a way to capture people.
So I think this talks to maybe some of the differences between a commercial track, a track that's been written for the sake of an audience listening to it first and foremost, that then go on to have a sync life, versus a track that's been written for media use. So typically in a kind of production library world, and obviously there are many different genres that are represented, but there was definitely a kind of classic that you would expect a song to kind of have a kind of slow, steady build up to a crescendo and then a nice drop off, and then sort of there'll be a sort of like happy kind of level towards the last 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And that meant that those tracks were very versatile when it came to editing, that they were quite predictable, and an editor could kind of chop them up a little bit and kind of move them around a scene at ease. So I think that if you're working in a library space, then there's definitely something to be said about a kind of structure that's typical in that regard.
And I would also add to that, Nick, that changes in a song, much like in any score piece, are things that you need to have, the highs and lows of a song. Like I said, that people talk about the drop in a traditional song setting. Those things are incredibly needed to be connected to film and TV and the visual media spectrum. And that's whenever you're making anything, don't just make it sound too samey, right? Give it some lift and some dip and some vibe. And, so it's figuring out how to get that kind of changes that make it really a unique listening experience for people.
Yeah, and to that point, I actually know editors who would be able to at least do a first selection of tracks based on the waveform alone. So maybe listen to the first 15 seconds, but they could quickly rule a track in or out based on the shape of the waveform.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Which, I mean, obviously, these are people that are doing that kind of maybe working with, several hundred tracks in any kind of session. So I guess there's a high level of familiarity there. But then I'd say on the kind of converse side of that, and this is definitely the space that we occupy at Songtradr, is a lot of it comes down to being authentic. Like one of the big things that we put in front of any music supervisor or any broadcaster or any ad agency is around the authenticity of the music. And some of that is around making it non-formulaic, and meaning that it's actually a true representation of that person's art and the genres that art comes from. And I think there's a lot to be said for that as well, particularly if you are essentially writing that music as an artist, and sync is just one part of the overall kind of economic model.
Yeah, and I think to Nick's point, you don't want to try to be too clever to be sync friendly. You really want artists to make their art, and hopefully it fits in with the projects that you're looking at.
Absolutely. From Miller Promise, how do they, I think you guys, license songs? Why is the licensing so important? I'm not sure what aspect.
Well, it's important in the sense that everything's got to be buttoned up. So you have to be able to speak for your art and represent it on a financial and economic model that, because we can't, that's the rubber meets the road for us. We may like a song plenty, but if your shit is not together, so to speak, it doesn't really matter. We have to walk away and move on to the next. So music licenses, again, there's everything to hearing the music, but if I can't clear it, it doesn't matter to me. It becomes more frustrating than anything, and something I would never go back to again.
Listen, it's the same as like any contract, isn't it? It's ultimately there to protect the kind of economic and moral interests of all the parties. So as a producer, as a film producer, I want to know that I can use that track safely, that I've got the right kind of indemnities, that when I need to put it onto DVD or I'm going to stream it on Netflix, I'm not suddenly going to get bitten because I haven't cleared those rights. And ultimately, as an artist or a songwriter, I want to know that I'm going to get paid fairly for my work. And I want to make sure that I have control over how and when it's used.